All right. So let's begin. Who could tell us what's the difference? What's the difference between? Oh, you guys are ready now? Okay.
What are we reviewing?
Yes. So why do we make a distinction about global marketing? Why is that unique? Because that's what we're focusing on is global marketing, which suggests that we're going to think globally but act locally. What does that mean? So why is that significant when we talk about global marketing? We're going to operate as a multinational corporation. Let's say we're an American-based company. We want to sell our products in markets other than the United States. What is it that needs to happen? What are some of the things that need to happen in order for us to be successful?
You have to understand the other uncontrollable elements that are going to affect you.
Right, absolutely. So there's some uncontrollable elements, and there's some controllable elements, both of which we need to address. So what would be some examples of the uncontrollable elements that we're going to have to deal with?
The economy is one of them.
Absolutely. So the economy, for example, is not something that's within our control. We need to take that into consideration and understand how that's going to impact our ability to market our product or service. And certain markets may be in a better economic situation than others. Although we operate as a global economy, and very often economic crisis spreads from one market to another. That's certainly something that we need to be sensitive to. Because if one market is in economic crisis, why would that have an impact in another market? Let's say another country or another region of the world. How is that possible?
There's nothing acts in isolation anymore. If you look at the economy now, with every step that the euro takes, the dollar has, and there's an effect on the behalf of the dollar as well.
So there's an interdependency in markets. So the economy is something that we certainly need to take into consideration. And that being said, although we look at the market and the economic situation on a global basis, still there are some markets that are in better economic situations than others. And some have been experiencing poor economic conditions for an extended period of time. We need to understand that. We need to understand whether or not that country is experiencing a recession. Whether it's a recession that just began or a recession that's lasted 5 years, because that's going to influence our ability to successfully market our product and service on a global basis. So very critical to understand the controllable elements. We said one of them is the economy. What else? What else is an uncontrollable element? Go ahead, Daniel.
The culture of the forward market.
Absolutely. So we most definitely need to adjust our marketing plan to the culture of each market. And that's what we mean when we say we have to tailor our marketing mix. So the culture in that market is not going to change. We need to change. And if we're ethnocentric in our management style, then we're not going to be successful. So we need to be willing to adapt and customize our product and services to meet the needs of the local market, and so that the product and service is relevant to that particular culture. So in some cultures, for example, there's certain icons. And in other cultures, what we might have considered to be an icon in another market could be something that's considered to be offensive and despicable. So in one market, what we consider to be a hero, in another market, we might consider to be a villain or a conqueror. It depends on the perspective. What are some of the elements of culture? When we talk about culture, there's quite a few aspects.
So history is a big aspect of the culture. Understanding the basics of a country's history can help give you an idea of what the culture is the way it is.
Absolutely. So we need to have a historic perspective. That's going to help us develop our marketing plan. What else?
Taste.
Understanding the demographics of the society, as in like religion, base.
Absolutely. So the demographics, we need to know what is the composition of the market. What percentage of the market is male versus female? What are the different age groups? So let's say, for example, is 60% of the market 50 and older? That's going to help us determine whether or not our product and service is going to be relevant in that particular market. Also, religion. Very important, and in some cases, more significant depending on the product that we're selling. So if you have a product that has a strong religious significance or affiliation, then you need to know, well, how many Christians live in that market? Or how many Buddhists live in that market? Or how many Muslims? Or how many Jews, etc.? And that's going to help us determine whether or not we should focus on trying to penetrate that particular market. Education. The educational system is an important part of culture and the socialization of the people that live in that society. So how do we become socialized? How do we acquire culture? Well, certainly through family and friends, and also importantly through the educational system. That's going to impact who we are, the way we think, our values, our norms, our beliefs. And we said we need to understand what's called the self-reference criterion. What is a self-reference criterion?
It's the way that you interpret other cultures based on your personal past experiences.
Right, absolutely. So we can't judge. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of the target market. Who's the target market? What's the difference between the target market and the target audience? We said there's a distinction. The target market is who we want to buy our product or service, and the target audience is who we want to reach with our advertising and marketing communications. And we said very often the target audience is a subset of the target market. So if we're going to sell a product, if our desire is to sell a product in a particular market to, let's say, men, well then our challenge is, how do we communicate with them? How do we communicate with men in that particular market? So we need to decide, is our target audience all men? We could say that. I mean, indirectly, yes, our target audience will be all men. But what's the most effective and efficient way to communicate with our target market is to find segments that are large, reachable, and have similar needs and wants. So just to say that all men, right, that's a very broad generalization. We need to look at the differences and also the similarities between different groups of men. Maybe it's by age. We said demographics is significant. Well, for the product that we're selling, let's say we're selling men's sneakers. Would it make sense to segment the market by age? And more than likely, we're going to find similar needs and wants for footwear based on particular age groups. So as you get older, athletic performance is less important in your footwear. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
Comfort would be a more appropriate USP, unique selling proposition. That would be a more relevant brand promise, if you will. Whereas for younger groups of customers or potential customers, performance, athletic performance is going to be more significant. So that's one example of where we would take the footwear market in a particular country and segment it to try and customize our product to meet the needs of specific segments in the marketplace. And that might mean different features for the sneakers or footwear, different design, and not just the way the product looks, the aesthetic design, but also the way it's physically designed to deliver on comfort or performance. And what did we say about quality? We made a distinction about quality. We said in a given market, if we're going to sell our products on a global basis, that we need to understand that there's perceived quality and what? Performance quality. Who remembers what's the difference? Yeah, Daniel?
Perceived quality is the way that the consumer actually views the level of quality, and performance quality would be a more objective way of, defining how it performs under certain conditions.
Right. Does it actually do what we said? So it's not enough. Remember, we said when we advertise, we need to have pillars of support. We need to have proof points.
On the choreo.
Right, absolutely. So we can't just make haphazard claims and allegations. It's not enough that there's perceived quality by our target market or the target audience, but there actually has to be performance quality. We have to be able to deliver on what we promised.
So how would you do that with, let's say, car marketing in an international market? Like the car markets in Europe and America are completely, totally different. So how would you?
Absolutely. So that's an important first step, is that you've identified that there's differences in the car markets in Europe and the United States. And then the question is, well, what are the differences? How are the requirements different?
Well, as you say, in Europe, you see a lot more smaller cars, more
Absolutely.
compact. In America, it's much more large and big and muscle. I guess I don't know, American muscle.
Could be based on the demographics.
But so for companies such as, let's say, Ford, who sells in both markets, when you go, how do they create like a car? Let's say they have the Taurus. I don't know if that exists anymore. How would they establish that? How would they design that to promote both in Europe and America?
So you'd have to develop a car. If you don't have, like you're saying, a smaller car in your lineup that you also sell in the United States, because you may not, like you said, maybe in the United States, for a variety of reasons, consumers purchase larger cars. So then, if we want to penetrate that market, then we're going to have to design a car that's smaller to meet the needs of that particular market. And importantly, we talked about homologation, which is required product specifications. So in certain markets, for example, there's requirements that the government places upon companies who want to sell in that particular market. And even in the United States, remember we talked about in California, for example, that the emissions standards are different than in New York. And if you want to sell cars in California, then the cars have got to be retrofitted, or they have to be able to minimize the level of pollution that's produced so as not to exceed the regulation or the standard in California. And we might have to customize the color of the cars. Maybe in certain markets, the colors that are appealing are going to vary. And in certain markets, different colors represent different feelings, different emotions. And so in some markets, it would be considered outrageous to have a car in that particular color. But in other markets, that's considered to be acceptable. So we have to, when we think about selling products on a global basis, we have to be prepared to customize the product itself, whether it means changing the size of the product, the color of the product. Ezra mentioned that if you're selling food, then you need to change the recipe. Yeah, the taste, the flavor. So you might sell a Big Mac, but in India it's not going to be made of beef, because in India the cow is considered to be sacred. Well, you could sell a Big Mac. Of course, you still want to sell a Big Mac. More than 1 billion people in India, but it can't be a beef burger. It's got to be, yeah, maybe it is chicken, or rice patty, or who knows what it is. But they still sell the Big Mac. So the Big Mac is sold all around the world, but importantly, they customize, modify the product to meet the needs of the local market. And in this case, what Ezra was suggesting before is that we have to change the taste of the product, the flavor, and obviously there's other dietary requirements like what we talked about. In some markets, the food needs to be kosher, and so on. So McDonald's is a great example of a successful multinational corporation, because in every market that they sell, they realize that they need to customize the products that they sell and have a unique menu. So they don't sell the same products in every market. It would be more efficient for them to do that, but they realize that the needs and wants and the requirements in markets around the world vary. So they definitely don't have this ethnocentric mentality in terms of how they do business. They very deliberately customize their products and services. And it's challenging to do that from a management perspective, to tailor your products. Some companies, even in the United States, they try to customize their assortment, for example, like Walmart. They realize that the demographics in the United States are very diverse. There's a very significant number of Asians, Hispanics, African Americans, for example. And so what they do is they try to customize their assortments in different categories so that it's relevant to the customers that shop in that particular market. So, for example, in Latin America and Spanish-speaking people do a significant amount of water-based cooking. So what does that mean? That means basically you boil. When you cook, you boil things, whether it's rice or beans or potatoes. And so what they do, for example, is they try to have assortments in their stores that address and meet or even exceed the requirements of those customers. So they have products that make it easy to prepare those types of foods. So you need to know your customer. Those companies that are able to do that are very successful. And that's not as easy as it sounds. So you might say, well, let's see, in which markets are there a large number of Hispanics? Let's say, maybe we'll take Mexicans, for example. It's very difficult to say, well, in this particular market, we're going to put on the shelf this group of products, and in other stores, a different group of products. Because remember, when we talked about distribution, we talked about the different distribution channels. For mass merchants, sometimes we call them discounters, like Walmart, Kmart, Target, those types of big box retailers, a key to their success is that they have a standardized, typically they have a standardized, what we call planogram, P-O-G, planogram. That means that what's on the shelf in one store is on the shelf in another one of their locations. The layout is the same, and the products on the shelf are the same. That's part of the secret of their success. Now, what I just told you is that they're trying to, even though they realize that that's part of the secret to their effectiveness and efficiency, they still try to customize the planograms where it makes sense, where it's possible, where it's relevant, which is very challenging. Now, if you have two stores, you might think, well, you know, I have two stores, it's manageable. Well, what about if you have 2,000 stores? What about if you have 3,000 stores, like Walmart, for example? That's not as easy as it sounds. That becomes very challenging logistically, and their logistics is state of the art. That's certainly a source of competitive advantage for Walmart, is their logistics and their supply chain management and their ability to effectively manage inventory. Think about apparel, for example. What do you think? Do you think that apparel is something that you would customize based on a particular market?
Yeah.
How would that apply, whether it's in the United States or outside of the United States? How would that be significant?
Climate, if one area is a lot colder than another or a lot warmer than another.
Absolutely. So there's a big difference between selling, let's say, apparel in Jamaica versus selling apparel in Canada. So in Montreal, it's literally like, what is it, like 6 degrees right now? So it sounds, as we talk about it, it sounds sort of like a blinding glimpse at the obvious, but wouldn't it just be natural to say, well, it's winter. We sell these, you know, coats, heavy coats, down coats. But it's not winter in every market. And in some markets, maybe they don't even have winter. Right? The weather is pretty mild all year round. Companies make these kind of mistakes. Just like we said, Chevrolet, a major manufacturer of cars, wants to sell the Chevy No-Go in Mexico. That's what they, that was their big idea back in the day.
Good question. Is that true that like Walmart, for example, has you know everything in the same section in every store in every market?
That's the goal. They do vary it from market to market because not all their stores are supercenters. which are 200,000 square feet. Some of their stores are a bit smaller than that, so sometimes the layout is a little bit different.
I was gonna say it would make more sense that each. I mean, obviously, okay, if they're all gonna be in New York, let's say a few in Manhattan or something like that. Imagine there were 3 in Manhattan. Okay, fine. If they had the same layout, I could understand that. But to say that the one in New York has the same layout as the one in Atlanta, Georgia, I mean, it's you have totally different markets.
Yeah, but so what they do is
So,
it's very challenging to build a retail location. So what they do is they try to implement best practices. So they feel that at this point in their history that they've established a retail format that's effective. So once you've identified that format or a particular process that's effective, you want to implement that in as many markets as possible. So yes, in Atlanta, when they build a store, it's the same layout and format, size and so forth as in New Jersey or California, unless of course there's some local requirements in terms of building codes or what have you, but it's a very significant investment to design a retail format. So to go into each market, if we're going to design one from scratch, is going to take many more years to implement the new store, but also
we say even the aisles are all going to be the same. Like
well,
aisle 6 is always going to have beer, and I don't know.
Yeah, directionally yes, that's been the secret to their success. But they also realize that what we've talked about is that you need to customize the assortment to be relevant to the local market.
Right.
So yes, directionally, absolutely, the goal is to standardize their retail format. However, that being said, they do make an effort to try to customize the assortment when it makes sense. Now think, for example, we talked about, you guys raised the idea about coats. What about, for example, you think about sports? How many don't people have usually their preference for a particular team, whether it's basketball or football, for a particular team that's in their country or in their state? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, do you think, how likely is it that in California that you have a lot of New York Knicks fans? Not so much. I mean, how many, so when you decide what t-shirts you're going to carry in your store, how many New York Knicks t-shirts do you think that you're going to sell in Los Angeles? Now, it doesn't mean that you can't sell any, but remember, we can't sell the t-shirts for all the teams, can we? I mean, we have still a limited amount of space. What we have to do is maximize shelf space productivity. That's our challenge when we're trying to sell on a global basis, is that we have to convince retailers that adding our product to their assortment is going to increase their sales and their profits. So we have to show them that we understand the market, we understand the needs and wants of the customers, and that we have a product that's going to meet those requirements. In the drugstore channel, for example, they also have a standardized planogram, and it doesn't mean that in every market it's identical, but absolutely, if you look at, just for example, in this market, the number of Walgreens that are opening up, absolutely, they have a store design, and that's the store design that they try to open up in every market.
So they place
Well,
certain
yeah,
products
so-
together in every store, so that could be like part of a planogram. Like always having the shampoo next to the conditioner, or always having.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an issue of adjacencies. What products do you have on the same shelf or the adjacent shelf? Because then in these types of mass merchant channels, you have what's called a 4-foot section, 4 feet of shelving. And you have one 4-foot section and another 4-foot section. Those we consider those to be adjacencies. Some shelving is a little bit longer, but the typical shelf is 4 feet.
Do they ever do it smaller than that?
You could.
I guess some products are very limited in scope. Like take for example, I don't know.
Well, I mean, you could cross over. I mean, you could still. I'm just giving you from the implementation perspective. Once you have 6 4-foot sections next to each other, that's sort of seamless. I'm just telling you from if you were actually going to go out and start to set up a store, what you should expect. But yeah, you could have maybe 2 on this shelf, and then the rest of the items are 15 of some other product type. They also have seasonal aisles, which is also an example of where they've tried to customize their assortment. For example, so they'll have for summer, all of a sudden you'll see as it gets into the spring, all of a sudden they start to have all these sorts of suntan lotion and beach balls and towels and all sorts of things for summer and beach. And then other times of the year they have
Snow shovel.
right, absolutely, snow shovels and salt and things like that. But those are not a permanent. Usually, those are not a permanent part of their planogram. Some stores sell shovels all year round, but even at Home Depot, for example, when it's winter, then they bring in an extra assortment specifically for the heavy snow. But some markets get a lot of snow, and some markets don't. So managing your inventory and the distribution of that inventory is very challenging. So when we talked about the modes of entry, certainly one of the advantages of having a joint venture is that our expectation is that our joint venture partner is going to have access to the channels of distribution. So we have a particular product, maybe our brand we feel is going to be relevant in that particular market as well. Maybe we have some brand equity, but we don't have a sales force there. We don't have any contacts. Because what we're talking about there is what? Business-to-business marketing. So we're a manufacturer of a product. We want to sell our product to a retailer. That's business-to-business. That's a different challenge for us. So working with a partner, forming a joint venture, can be very compelling. And one of the things that we would certainly hope to get is the ability to distribute our products through that network, which presumably we don't have. So it's challenging when we say, well, we want to be a multinational company. Well, I mean, that's certainly a worthwhile objective, but implementing it is certainly very challenging. And certainly the place, when we think about the 4 Ps, certainly place, distribution, and the channels of distribution is a significant hurdle for us to overcome. And that's why companies form joint ventures or strategic alliances and use that as a mode of entry. Because it's not enough for us to say, you know what, I want to sell my product in China because there's 1.3 billion people there. I want to sell my product in India. There's 1 billion people there. And how are we going to do that? How are we going to make that a reality?
Are you talking about different channels of distribution or about different ways to enter into a market?
Well, certainly the channels of distribution is an issue, and we said that a joint venture is one mode of entry. What else? What are some of the other modes of entry?
Direct selling, franchising, catalog selling, licensing, the internet
Yes.
is the
Yes.
first one that most
Indirect?
people use.
What was that?
Direct, indirect? Isn't there direct and indirect?
Right, so what would be an example?
Direct selling or direct importing, exporting?
Well, yeah, go ahead. You said exporting. Exporting is another mode of entry. And each of those modes of entry have certain risks associated with them. What is the least risky?
Internet.
Internet. Tell us why. Ezra, tell us why. So remember, we said this is on a continuum. And usually what happens is a company might attempt to sell their product or service on the internet first, and then that doesn't mean that they're always going to rely on that mode of entry, but their mode of entry is going to evolve over time, because there are certain risks associated with a particular mode of entry that we select. So is selling our product or service on the internet, is that high risk or low risk?
Low risk, because at the end of the day, you're not investing in a certain country or a certain market. You're putting it out there, and then once you get the orders for it, you say, okay, here's a market that wants a product, or here's a market that doesn't want a product. Once you know, okay, you'll see, oh, we got 1,000 orders from India, it's not worth it for us. We got 2 million orders from India, now it's worth it for us. Now we should go into that market. But you're not actually putting yourself out there enough for people to reach you, but you're not reaching to them as much.
Well, so one of the things that Ezra brought to our attention is the difference between make to stock versus make to order, which is if you're selling on the internet, depending on what you're selling and the particular customers, there's different expectations in terms of how long it will take to receive the product. One of the advantages of internet selling is that it's more feasible to adopt a make-to-order strategy, which means that we're not holding and tying up working capital and cash in inventory. It presents us with the opportunity to produce what we need, which is based on the orders that we get. If we don't get any orders, then we don't produce any inventory. Or maybe we might produce a small amount of inventory, but that's very different from even if we're going to export. So there's no make to order really. You decide that you want to sell the product in Japan or Iraq or Egypt, you have to ship the product. So even we have a joint venture, presumably we've decided not to produce the product in that market, you have to ship the merchandise. And depending on the retailer, they're going to have different requirements and expectations in terms of turnaround time. So we might have to have a distribution center that's going to hold a significant amount of inventory. Because retailers, they don't want to hold inventory. So if it takes 30 days on a boat to reach that market, they're not interested in that. What they know is they ordered it on Monday, and if not by the same day, they would certainly expect by Tuesday or Wednesday that they would have the product in their store to sell. So with the internet, we're tying up less working capital, and our inventory is not in jeopardy. But what did we say about exporting? What's some of the challenges with exporting?
You're also actively seeking it out. So there's much more investment done in that way. That when
You
you
also
export.
produce the product.
Also that.
Yeah, so that you've,
You have to make sure your capacity can handle it.
right, so if you're gonna export, then you're gonna have to ship the product, and what might happen?
Could get damaged.
Yeah, the inventory, it's very likely the inventory can be damaged. And
Food, it could spoil.
it could spoil, it could become obsolete, it could be destroyed, it could be hijacked. Now, I hope you don't think I'm being too fanciful or theatrical when I suggest that, pirates could take control of the ship, because that's a reality. That's a problem. So if we're sending, 10 container loads of product, and that's $1 million worth of merchandise, the vessel might be hijacked, or it could be hit by a missile. I mean, think of the times that we live in. That's not crazy. I hope you don't think I'm saying something that's like, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. What do you mean? The boat got sunk and we lost all the merchandise? Yes. Yeah, yes, that's a possibility. That's a very real possibility. And how do we deal with the issue and manage the risk of getting paid? Because certainly, if we want to sell on a global basis, we have to deal with the issue of payment. Because think about it. Let's say we are selling to, we're selling a particular product to China.
Where they take price into consideration very highly.
So price is an issue, but what I'm concerned about for us as global marketers is
Method of payment?
how do we get paid? Because what happens if you send them the boat? Let's say the boat gets there, and they receive $1 million worth of merchandise, and then you say, all right, so when are we going to get the $1 million? And they say, you know what? I don't know. We decided we're not going to pay. Then what happens? Or is there another way of doing business as global marketers that will address that issue? What's our options?
So first of all, I also just wanted to ask a question. Right, so I know different contracts stipulate who takes ownership of the product at what different times. So I know in some cases it doesn't take, the person who ordered it doesn't take ownership of it at all until it actually arrives by them. In some cases the shipping company actually takes ownership. In other cases the person who originally exported it maintains ownership to a certain degree up until certain points. So, how does that kind of play into that?
Right, so that's at the heart of this issue. So let's see if we could address that. What companies do to address this issue about who owns the inventory. Sounds like you've taken accounting, because that's certainly a very big issue in accounting, is the ownership of inventory, and when the goods are in transit, because the inventory is an asset. So the question is it the asset of the seller? At what point in time is it the asset of the seller? And at what point in time has it become an asset of the purchaser?
And it changes apparently based on different kind of contracts.
Right, well, absolutely. So the first thing that has to be established is the method of payment. And so if we're going to operate on a global basis, then what we need to do is have a letter of credit. A letter of credit allows a third party to make the payment. So they're the intermediary, whether it's HSBC or Bank of America. This is what happens. Critical for us to do business, especially if you're saying we want to do exporting. We're going to export $1 million or maybe even $10 million worth of merchandise. How are we going to get paid? The letter of credit is an agreement amongst the buyer and the seller and a financial institution. And what happens is the seller will give the $1 million to the financial institution, HSBC, a Bank of America. Bank of America is instructed to pay us the $1 million when the merchandise is received. So the letter of credit is a guarantee of payment, assuming that the merchandise is received. So we're not going to just say, okay, I believe you, you're going to pay us. No, the letter of credit says, Bank of America has $1 million that we're holding to be paid to you, for us, our company, upon the receipt of the merchandise. Now, does that give you a sense of comfort? Do you feel better about shipping $1 million worth of merchandise to some far-off place because us in our infinite wisdom, we decided we want to sell our product in 100 different countries. Go figure, right? So there's a risk associated with that. So you ship $1 million worth of merchandise, and then what? We said there's so many differences. How would we even begin to deal with this issue? Look at all the differences we said about, the differences in culture. There's the traditions and the norms and the values and the religion is different from our own. They don't speak the same language, which is also a part of culture. How are we even begin to navigate this situation? We ship them $1 million worth of merchandise, and the check never comes. So with a letter of credit, that addresses that issue. We ship $1 million worth of merchandise. We have that letter of credit, which is in our name. It's not just, it doesn't just say, oh, they have $1 million in our bank. They said, no, this is for a specific transaction. So you're going to have numerous letters of credit. So we're going to be named specifically, our company, for a specific order, for a specific amount, and then the shipping company is going to process the bill of lading. So there's these documents. The bill of lading is a document that is processed. So we load the ship gets loaded, and the bill of lading, when it's processed, verifies receipt of the merchandise. And so we're able to, because there's these intermediaries, presumably they're independent intermediaries involved, then we provide that supporting documentation, and the third party is going to pay us for the inventory. So that's an important enabler for us as global marketers. That's critical. Because wouldn't you be concerned about shipping $1 million worth of inventory someplace? Where's the guarantee of payment? Especially they're literally thousands of miles away. We want to be global marketers. We're shipping goods to a country that's 10,000 miles away from where we live, or where our business is located. So certainly very relevant as we talk about exporting. So we said virtual stores on the internet, exporting, what else? Daniel said franchising and licensing. Say it again, Joshua. What was it?
I said direct investment.
Oh, direct investment. And what are some of the issues as it relates to FDI, foreign direct investment?
Most risk.
Highest
risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So to operate certain manufacturing facilities, the cost can be quite extensive. They might be talking about investing billions of dollars to build a manufacturing facility. In other cases, it could be less, but still you're talking about a significant investment to build a manufacturing facility and to purchase manufacturing equipment.
What is the lowest risk? The risk is the highest.
Well, selling on the internet is the lowest risk. Licensing and franchising are also of limited risk from the perspective of inventory, because what we're selling is a process and our brand name, but certainly you'd want to be cautious so as not to tarnish your brand name. Because if you license your brand, for example, while that sounds like a great idea, what about the issue of quality? Is there going to be the performance quality? Because now that they have our brand, now that they're licensing our brand, there's a certain perception, but what about performance? Are they going to deliver a high quality product? And that's certainly a legitimate and significant concern. Look at some of the brands that we talked about already and the brand equity that they have. Way into the billions. We said for the Coca-Cola brand, Business Week estimates that to be nearly $70 billion. And that's just for the brand. Remember we said that's not the value of all the soda that they have in their distribution centers. That's not the value of their corporate headquarters. It's not the value of their office equipment, just the brand. So it is a risk. It definitely is a risk if we license our brand. We shouldn't take that lightly. But yeah, it's a different type of risk from the risk that we associated with inventory or our manufacturing facility. And we need to look at the political factors, the level of political stability or political instability in a particular market. That's going to influence our decision to invest in a particular market, to build a manufacturing facility. Why? Why is that significant? Why is the political factors an issue? What is our concern? What do you think, Daniel?
Why political factors make a difference in global marketing? Well, I mean, take a look, for example, at China, where you need to be considered a legal person to be able to conduct any business. Unless you attain that status by dealings with, like, the Communist Party, then you won't be able to operate anything there.
So absolutely. So there's, we need to be aware of the type of economic system and political system that's in place. And in the communist market, how does that impact foreign direct investment?
Gives you a lot more hurdles to jump through before you can actually start selling something.
Right, and in some markets, the foreign direct investment is not allowed. So in the United States, we said, go to Oklahoma and buy a 1 million square foot field, and you could build a manufacturing facility, assuming there's not any local ordinances that would prevent us from operating a manufacturing facility there. If you have the money, it's not a problem. But you can't go to China and do that.
The same with Coca-Cola in India. India didn't allow Coca-Cola because they thought that they were going to be too powerful. And then only years later did they let them.
Right, so that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And in some cases, that's a barrier to entry for us into a particular market. But importantly, we should think of modes of entry on a continuum. Does that make sense? Does that seem like a plausible approach? Because what does that enable us to do? What's the benefit of taking that approach to penetrating a particular market? Go ahead, Ruben.
As you go along the continuum, then it shows like how much of control and risk that you're experiencing at each level.
Yeah, so we learn as we go. So we've identified a particular market. We sell some products on the internet. Maybe we try licensing. When we license our brand, that means our partners are developing the market. We see how that goes, then maybe we're ready to go and to the next level on the continuum and export product to that particular market. And then consider, once we've established and had a better sense as to the market opportunity, the size of the opportunity, maybe foreign direct investment would be feasible. Maybe that makes sense. Because remember, if we're shipping the product, we have to decide whether we're going to make the product in our home country and ship it, or we're going to manufacture the product locally. So there's some trade-offs there. Because shipping the product from New Jersey to Chicago is practical. Shipping your product from New Jersey to Japan, now that has a lot of challenges associated with that. Would you agree? That's not something that's simple, and certainly there's the cost of doing that we need to consider, and also the time, right? So how long does it take to ship the product to Japan? To Chicago, that seems very doable. But to Japan, that's a whole different story. And we said that there's a strong possibility that during the shipment of our product, that it could become damaged, spoiled, obsolete, destroyed. So that's a very high risk when you think about shipping product a very long distance. So when it left the factory, there were no defects, but during transit, very often there's damage that occurs to the product. In fact, most companies allow what we call a breakage allowance. Now, the interesting thing about the breakage allowance is that some retailers and distributors, they feel that that's like a guaranteed, like you just get 5%. In some categories, it's approximately 5%. So if you think, oh, we just write that off, we take that off the invoice, it's not a discount. It's meant to offset or to cover damage to the merchandise, because the industry recognizes that, yeah, there's gonna be damage during shipment.
How are we defining breakage allowance?
Well, it varies based on by the seller. The seller has to determine what the criteria is to access the allowance. But one of the things I'm highlighting is that some buyers feel that it's an entitlement, that they automatically just get, let's say, a 5% allowance, maybe the merchandise wasn't damaged at all. And in some cases, which is challenging, is they just take it right off the invoice, which is not appropriate. All right? If you have a claim for an allowance, then that's paid out of a separate budget. What would be the concern about, as a seller's point of view, and when you think about accounting and tracking your sales, what impact is that going to have if your vendor does that? Because Walmart does that. I can tell you, I've had that experience with them, where they just take 5% off the invoice. Then what happens?
You stiffed us.
Yeah, you send them an invoice for $589,000, and they send you they pay you an amount less than that, which in this case we said would be like, what? How much is that going to be? Like $30,000 less, 5%, right? Wouldn't that roughly be about $30,000? What about it? If you send somebody an invoice for $589,000 and they sent you a check for $559,000, how would you feel about that? Now remember, that's sales. We're looking at sales. We're concerned about our sales volume. So that's something that we need to be aware of. Now, if your budget, if your bonus is based on the level of sales that the company achieves, wouldn't that be something that concerns you? Because they just took $30,000 off the invoice. It means that your sales volume is less.
But does that would mean technically with one of those, with the breakage allowance, that if 50% of the merchandise was damaged, then they have no claim.
50%?
Meaning they get to not pay because they say, yeah, some things are gonna get damaged. Okay, so let's say it was more than 5%.
Oh, well, that's a major problem. Yeah, usually, it's agreed upon up front. They tell you the terms. It would be.
Like each is its own deal, meaning like each company has its own contract or whatever.
Right, absolutely. So with a particular retailer, you have a certain agreement and there's certain terms. But the insight that I'm sharing with you is that 5% is considered typical in some categories. Now, if it was 50%, then maybe you need to, that's a different issue. If really 50% of the merchandise was damaged, then maybe you have to file an insurance claim. Because 50%, that means out of that $589,000 order, we just lost 300 grand approximately. Now that's a big deal. So yeah, we got to consider other remedies there. But when we package products, now remember we said that the brand is what's wrapped around the product, and then we take that and we package it, right? There's got to be packaging. And so this issue of breakage is not something that the company doesn't take seriously. It is something they take seriously, so they design packaging to minimize breakage. Very often for consumer products, the packaging costs more than the standard cost of the product. Like, for example, think about even a bottle of soda. Which do you think costs more? The plastic bottle or the carbonated water that's inside the bottle? With sugar, they add sugar. Yeah, they do add sugar. And a little colorant, usually. In products, for example, that like glass products, like dishes, for example, or glass bowls, you'll see that they take very special care to have enough styrofoam and cardboard so that if you drop the box, and we do what's called in the industry a drop test. I know, not that creative, but literally what they do is they take the box and from a certain height and they drop it and see if it breaks. Now, it doesn't mean if you go to the top of this building and drop it, it's not going to break, but it's like in normal transit, if somebody had it at waist level and they dropped it, would it break? So they try to design, packaging engineering is an occupation that people work on that in organizations full time. Packaging is very expensive, especially cardboard. Corrugated is very expensive. One of the big companies is Tenneco, and it's something, that's part of our cost. We've got to take that into account when we determine the standard cost for our product. Now, before we go, there's something that Daniel had alluded to that I want to make sure that we covered. There's a difference between FOB, which is free on board, FOB cost, and landed cost. You need to make sure that when you get a quote from a manufacturer, because one of the enablers for us as global marketers is that we don't, in every category, need to have foreign and direct investment. We could outsource the production. We could have contract manufacturing. And that means that we're going to have to get quotes on how much we're going to have to buy the product for. Now remember, the advantage is we buy the product from somebody else and then wrap the product in our brand. So it may be contract manufacturing in that particular market, or a market that's close, in close proximity to the market that we want to sell. Now, the price, I should say the cost to us, is quoted as FOB and landed. As we evaluate the opportunity, we need to make sure that we understand what the landed cost is. Because the landed cost is the cost that includes transportation.
So first on board is just the bare product before it actually gets shipped anywhere.
Right, absolutely. So FOB means that it's the price, it's quoted at the unit level. So what is the cost of one unit, whatever the product is that we're selling, or that we're buying from this particular manufacturer, what is the cost of one unit? And then, let's say, what would be an example? What would be an example of the price that we would get a quote on? What do you think? If we're going to try to penetrate a particular market, what would be something that we might contract out to another manufacturing organization?
Say, if you're
Jeans, how about jeans? Jeans, let's go with jeans. So we decide that we're gonna have a company, and China has a very significant cut and sew operation. So when you think about making clothes, you have a large piece of material, then you cut it, and then you stitch it together. In the industry, we call that cut and sew. So what happens is you will get a quote on, let's say, for $5. FOB is $5. But then the question is, if we're ordering, let's say, that product from China, the question is, well, how much is it going to cost us to ship the product from China to another particular market? That's what the landed cost is going to include. So it might be 5 cents, it could be 10 cents, it could be $1. To ship, for example, a container from China to the United States, depending on the supply of containers, generally it's a 40-foot container. So a 40-foot steel container is what's loaded onto the ship. And there's boxes and boxes of the product. Those containers cost between $2,500 and approximately $5,000, depending on the time of year, and like I said, the supply of containers. Then that, let's say, $5,000, we need to spread that cost across each of the units that's in that container. Now, in the grand scheme of things, you might think, well, $5,000, that's not really such a lot of money. But that's just one container. And how many items do you have in that 40-foot container?
So the more efficient your packaging, the more easily able to.
Absolutely. So one of the things we talk a lot about is shipping air, which means that you waste the product is the packaging is not configured in a way so that it's very compact or that the items nest inside of each other. In fact, when companies design products, when you have industrial designers working on a particular product, these are things that they think about.
It's also why Wendy's has their burgers square.
Is it?
Yeah.
Interesting. Why? When they ship the...
So it's because everything comes from like main distribution centers. So by making them square, they're able to take up less room in each individual box. So you can fit more in the box, and you can get more in the overall container.
Also, with the FOB land out costing, doesn't it also determine who pays for it? Because like, wouldn't the person sending there, like if it's free on board, and the person sending it would have to pay for it, but it's land out costing the person.
Well,
buying it would have to pay for it?
Right, so another related issue has to do with the payment terms.
Right.
So by definition, what does that mean when you say free on board? So free on board means that that's the cost without the shipping cost, without the transportation cost. Now, if they agree to they give you free on board, if they say that they're going to cover the shipping costs, then in effect, what they're giving you is the landed cost. But absolutely, we need to make sure that we're capturing that. But yeah, there is a certain point, and this is something that could be negotiated between the parties, but certainly from an accounting perspective is very important, which I think you're alluding to, and also I think Daniel was addressing this point, is at what point does ownership of the merchandise transfer? So one of the issues is this idea of goods in transit. So when it's on the ship, who owns the merchandise?
It's different in each case.
Right, it depends.
I remember from accounting, it depends on which kind of contract you use up, and in some cases it could be anybody. It could be a third party, it could be the transportation company, it could be either side of the deal.
Yeah.
It could be anybody.
So it really, it does really depend on the situation. Go ahead, Noah.
Are there manufacturing companies in which you can, where they ship individually to people and they just charge you for the postage, or does everything have to go through your outlet in China?
Yes, it can happen that way. I think you raise a good point. Doesn't need to go through our distribution center, which is going to add handling costs. You could arrange to have drop shipments where it comes directly from the manufacturer in your packaging and so forth, and gets sent to a particular customer. Yes, that happens. And certainly that's something you should consider if that's feasible. Why do we need to make everything come through our distribution center? Because as soon as it does, and we have to touch it and process it, that means it has to absorb some of the costs. It's got to be burdened with some of the costs, the non-manufacturing costs associated with operating that distribution center. And so when you decide to, let's say, source a particular new product, one of the things that executives will start to talk about is what you're addressing is, can't we just ship it directly? Because they know that the company is already burdened with those non-manufacturing fixed costs, and they're saying, why does this product need to absorb some of those fixed costs? It's not going through the distribution center. So yeah, absolutely something that we should consider. Alrighty, so see you next time. Do good things.
Wednesday test.